We've seen how we can use dim, public and private for declaring our variables, and dependent on the location that you declare your variable will depend on the scope of that variable. So it will depend on where the variable can live. Now there is another declaration keyword called static, which can be quite useful. If we take the static variable file, which is available in your working folder, you'll find in module 1 there is a little procedure called static test, where we've declared x, we've told x to increment by 1, and then we've used the message box statement to write out x. So if we try to run this, we get 1 in the message box. If we try to run it again, we get 1 in the message box. The reason for that is the scope of this variable is just this procedure. So it's created at the beginning, it's assigned +1, in our case that's 1, it's written out, and then at the end of the sub, the variable is thrown away. If we change our dim statement here to static, you'll see that something rather clever happens. You can see it is a keyword because it's title case and blue. So we run our static test and it says 1, that's fantastic. We run our static test and it now says 2, not back to 1. The reason for that is that the static declaration type declares your variable, but then allows it to retain the value after the procedure is finished. Now you cannot use it outside the procedure. It's not the same as declaring a public variable that you can then reassign values to. It can still only be used within this procedure because this is where it was declared, but it actually remembers the last value it had so that you can make use of that, which is what we're doing here with the x plus 1. So it comes back in, and the second time it comes into the statement, it goes, oh, I've already got a value because I've been told to remember it. So we can use this statement to add 1 onto that value. So this is quite a useful way of actually being able to count, in this case, how many times the procedure has run, which depending on what you're trying to achieve can be quite useful. So this will carry on incrementing. Every time I run it, you'll find the value of x will go up. Now it's 3. Until, and this really sort of leads us into when do variables expire? Well, when it's a straightforward dim within a procedure, it expires at the end of that procedure. However, a global variable, or a static one in this case, has a different kind of expiry. A global variable will expire either when you quit Excel, or we can click a reset button up here in the VBA editor, this blue button here. This resets all the global and all the static variables back to whatever their original declaration was, which in most cases is pretty much empty. So if I click reset, if I now run the static test again, I'm back down to 1 because the variable value has been reset. So that's one way of effectively resetting all the global variables and of restarting any static ones that you have. There are 2 other ways. One is when the code crashes and you get that awful runtime error message and you click end on that error message. That resets all your variables as well. And you can even add an end statement at any point you like in your code, as long as it can be executed at that point, and that will reset all the variables. So I could even create a routine to reset the variables myself. So we'll create a sub. Let's call it reset variables. Remember that this is only going to have an effect on global variables and static variables. And the only command in here is the command end. Now it looks a little odd because you're expecting end something, but it's just end on its own. So no end if, no end sub, it's just simply end. So if I now run my static test, it quite happily goes up every time I run it. 2, I've run it 3 times, I've run it 4 times. If I then run my reset variables, nothing appears to have happened, but if I run my static test again, you'll see it's gone back to 1. So this little ability to build your own reset procedure could be quite useful in code if you're using some of these static variables to count items, to count actions, to count characters, to count whatever you want to count really. It retains the value once you leave the procedure. It cannot be used outside of the procedure, but when you come back into the procedure, it retains that previous value it used last time it was in there. So you can then use it, as we've used it here, as a little sort of count idea. But being able to set that count, we need to be able to reset, and that's a nice little end action that you can put inside a procedure, which is exactly the same as clicking reset here. But obviously inside your function, you don't want to have to give someone instructions how to open the VBA editor and click reset. You would just give them a button to press, perhaps, that would run our little procedure here. So that's this static declaration type, and a little look at when your variables expire, because that could be important when building your programs.